Far beyond the reach of familiar stars, the Empire thrived across countless worlds. They ruled with iron resolve and boundless ambition, spreading their banners from one end of the galaxy to the other. Yet even in their greatness there were whispers of dangers that no army could defeat, whispers that traveled through broken channels of communication, whispers from travelers who had seen things that should not have been seen. These whispers spoke of a fragile-looking planet on the edge of a quiet system, a planet called Earth. Warnings did not come once, they came, many times, drifting across frequencies old and new, sometimes crackling with static, sometimes clear, as though spoken directly into the mind. The message was always the same: do not go to Earth, it is a trap. Turn back before it is too late. The words carried fear and desperation, as though the senders had witnessed horrors no one else should ever face. The Empire received these signals with curiosity at first. Scientists and advisors analyzed the transmissions, trying to trace their origin, but the sources were scattered and inconsistent. Some signals came from ships that had been missing for centuries. Others appeared as echoes with no traceable beginning. It was as if the warnings had no single sender, as if the message itself had become alive, haunting the fabric of space. In the Grand Council chamber, high above the capital world, the Empire rulers debated these messages. Some voices urged caution, suggesting that a hidden power might guard this so-called Earth, but their words were drowned out by the pride of those who believed in the Empire supremacy. How could one small planet stand against fleets that could blot out suns? How could a species bound to a single world resist the might of an empire that had broken empires before? The Emperor himself listened in silence, his eyes fixed on the shifting holographic image of Earth. Suspended in the air above the council table, a small blue world shimmering, with oceans enveiled in clouds, beautiful and fragile, yet carrying with it the shadow of danger. At last, he rose and spoke, his voice steady and unshaken. The Empire has never feared the warnings of the weak, and it will not fear them now. Earth will be ours. The council erupted in applause, and the decision was sealed. No matter how many warnings were sent, no matter how many voices pleaded with them, the Empire chose to ignore them. They believed Earth would fall, as all other worlds had fallen, before. Their ambition would not allow retreat, their arrogance would not allow hesitation across the stars. The message continued to echo: do not go to Earth, it is a trap. But the sound was drowned beneath the roar of engines as the Empire began to prepare its greatest fleet to march toward a destiny it could not yet understand. The Empire leaders gathered once more within their towering chamber of glass and stone, a place where decisions that shaped the galaxy had always been made. Beneath the glow of stars projected across the vaulted ceiling, they spoke with the confidence of rulers who had never been denied anything they desired. They weighed the warnings against their pride and their hunger for expansion, and once again pride won among the advisors. There were those who trembled when the signals played on the chamber walls, the voices of lost travelers crying, do not go to Earth, it is a trap. They begged the Emperor to listen to these voices of fear. They spoke of fleets that had vanished and explorers who had never returned, but their words sounded weak against the thunderous certainty of the generals and governors who promised easy victory. They argued that the apparent warnings were nothing more than attempts to frighten the Empire away from a valuable world. The generals described Earth as a jewel hidden in a quiet system, a world rich with water, minerals, and life resources that could strengthen the Empire for millennia. The governors saw new colonies rising across its continents, new cities built beneath its skies. They imagined the wealth, the prestige, and the glory of adding another conquered world to the Empire. Chantha, Emperor, sat upon his throne, gazing at the holographic sphere of Earth spinning slowly above the council table. It shimmered with oceans and clouds, delicate and bright, and yet the message still burned across the air: do not go to Earth. It is a trap. Turn back before it is too late. But the Emperor was not a man who bowed to shadows. He was a man who believed the Empire destiny was to rule without limits. He rose from his seat and spoke with a voice that silenced all doubt. He declared that the warnings were the cries of the weak and the frightened, that Earth was no different than the countless worlds already under their command. His words ignited the chamber like fire. The generals pounded their fists upon the table. The governors shouted with excitement. The council erupted into celebration, as though conquest was already achieved. Beyond the chamber, across the Empire, news of the decision spread. Citizens cheered as fleets were assembled and soldiers prepared for glory. Factories thundered as weapons and ships were forged in greater numbers than ever before. The air of every world filled with the promise of victory. People told stories of how soon Earth would kneel, how soon the Empire would expand beyond the stars they already held. Yet Even as the celebration grew, the warnings did not stop across the void. The voices still cried in despair, repeating again and again, "Do not go to Earth, it is a trap." Some whispered that the Empire was walking willingly into death, but such whispers were drowned beneath the chorus of pride. The choice had been made. The Empire would not listen, it would not hesitate. The fleet was coming and Earth was waiting. The Empire prepared its greatest fleet, a force so vast that it seemed to stretch from one horizon of the stars to the other shipyards, across countless worlds burned with light and fire, as titanic vessels were forged and made ready, each ship a monument to the Empire, power armored in steel and armed with weapons that could tear moons apart. The citizens watched in awe as the fleets assembled, believing no enemy could withstand such might. The soldiers who boarded these ships carried themselves with pride, their armor gleaming beneath the lights of the hangars, their eyes fixed with determination. They sang songs of victory before the battles had even begun, their voices echoing through the corridors of metal and stone. They were raised to believe in the destiny of the Empire, and they believed Earth would be no different than the countless worlds already conquered. The admirals walked the command bridges of their flagships, their hands moving across glowing consoles as they prepared for the journey ahead. They studied the image of Earth, floating above their tables, a world blue and green, alive with oceans, forests, and cities. They did not see danger, they saw opportunity and conquest, a planet ripe to fall beneath the shadow of their fleets. From the throne world, the Emperor himself gave his blessing. He stood before his people and declared that Earth would soon join the Empire, that the warnings were nothing more than the last desperate attempts of the weak to stop the rise of their rule. His words spread through every colony, every outpost, every citizen, and the people erupted with cheers. The Empire was united in its march toward destiny. The day of departure arrived, and the skies above the Empire capital filled with light as the fleets ignited their engines, thousands of ships lifting into the black void, their trails burning like rivers of fire. The people below looked upward with tears of pride, knowing they were witnessing history, a new conquest that would be sung for generations to come. The admirals gave the order, and the armada moved into formation, columns of ships stretching beyond sight, their hulls gleaming beneath the light of nearby suns. The void of space trembled beneath their engines, and the stars themselves seemed to shift as the great fleet began its journey across the endless black toward the small blue world called Earth. Yet, even as they departed, the warning continued, a whisper through the void, a cry from those who had come before: "Do not go to Earth, it is a trap, turn back before it is too late." But the words went unheard, drowned beneath the thunder of the fleet engines, drowned beneath the cheers of the people who believed nothing could stand in their way on. So the Empire greatest fleet moved forward, carrying with it pride, ambition, and a destiny they believed unshakable. But waiting for them at the edge of a quiet system was a planet unlike any they had ever faced, a planet that hid its true face behind beauty and silence. The fleet sailed through the dark sea of stars with confidence and pride, their engines leaving trails of light that shimmered like rivers across the void. The admirals watched their progress with satisfaction, believing that victory was already secured. They spoke of Earth as though it were a treasure waiting to be claimed, a jewel hidden in silence. Their maps glowed with paths leading straight toward the blue world, and every soldier aboard every vessel felt the fire of triumph already burning in their hearts. But as the fleet drew closer to the solar system, something began to change. The stars around them seemed to flicker as though veils of shadow passed across their light. The instruments that measured distance and energy began to return strange readings, data that twisted and shifted as if reality itself was bending. The admirals dismissed these signals as malfunctions. The crews worked to adjust their systems, but unease crept through the corridors of steel like a whisper. At last the blue world came into view. Earth hung, suspended in the darkness, its oceans glimmering, its clouds curling white and soft. It looked small against the black endless sea of space, yet the soldiers could not deny its beauty, and many stared in silence as though the world itself was staring back. The admirals declared that this was proof of the Empire destiny to rule, that such a fragile world could not resist their might. But the planet did not look fragile to all eyes. Some among the crew felt an uneasiness they could not explain. The oceans seemed to shimmer too brightly. The clouds twisted in patterns that felt alive. The storms across its surface were vast, and violent lightning streaked through the atmosphere in endless arcs. And for some who gazed too long, it seemed the entire world pulsed like a heart beating in silent. Sensors began to report storms, larger than any recorded on other worlds, walls of thunder and clouds that covered entire continents, lightning that stretched for hundreds of miles, and never faded energy readings, spiked to levels that made no sense, and still, the admirals dismissed the data, declaring it was nothing more than natural weather cycles. The Empire had conquered countless worlds, with storms and quakes before, and this one would be no different, yet the warning returned again, glowing suddenly across the communication channels. A voice fractured by static filled the command decks, repeating the same desperate cry, "Do not go to Earth, it is a trap, turn back before it is too late." The voice shifted and twisted, sometimes sounding human, sometimes alien, sometimes mechanical, as if all voices that had ever warned before were speaking together at once. The crews trembled. The admiral silenced them, and ordered the fleet to continue. Earth turned slowly below its storms, raging its surface, hidden in veils of cloud and shadow, and though the fleet was strong, though the Empire believed itself unstoppable, some among them could not shake the feeling that the planet was waiting, watching, and smiling in silence. The warning came again, as the fleet held its position in orbit, a message burning across every channel at once, words that filled the corridors and echoed through the minds of every soldier and every officer. "Do not go to Earth, it is a trap, turn back before it is too late." The voice had no single tone, it shifted from male to female, from young to old, from human to something alien, as if countless lives were speaking together through one chorus of desperation. The admirals ordered the signals. Silenced, they declared the warning was nothing more than an echo of fear, a ghost left behind by weaker civilizations, who had failed to survive. They spoke with certainty, and reminded their crews that the Empire feared no world and no enemy. The Empire had crushed rivals with weapons that burned stars and broken armies that spanned galaxies. A single blue planet was nothing compared to such power, yet many among the lower ranks felt the weight of the message pressing upon them. Some whispered in the dark corners of their barracks, wondering who had sent the warning and why it never stopped. Others asked why no source could ever be traced, why the signals seemed to come from everywhere at once, even from within their own systems. The more they listened, the more they feared that the warning was not from a person but from the planet itself. On the bridges of the great flagships, the crews watched their consoles flicker with strange symbols, transmissions they could not decipher, maps filled with lines that shifted like veins, pulsing with light. The admirals dismissed them as glitches, but the younger officers felt their stomachs tighten as they stared at the patterns. Some swore the lights moved like living things flowing through the data, as if the machines themselves had been infected. Still, the order was given: prepare to descend, prepare for conquest. Fleets moved into tighter formation. Engines roared as the ships turned toward the atmosphere. Soldiers readied their weapons and spoke bravely to hide their fear. The image of Earth filled every screen, its storms circling in endless spirals, its surface veiled in light and shadow. And then the message came one final time, stronger than ever before. The entire fleet trembled as the voice boomed through the void, louder than the engines, louder than the thunder of the storms. "Do not go to Earth, it is a trap, turn back before it is too late." The voice carried not only words but emotions, grief, sorrow, and something else, a terrible certainty, as though the planet itself was screaming through them. But the Empire did not turn back. Pride was stronger than fear, ambition was louder than warnings. The admirals declared that destiny could not be denied, and that the fleet would break the silence of this world as it had broken so many before. And so the ships descended, their trails burning across the black sky of space as Earth waited below, hidden and alive. The fleet began its descent, the colossal ships slicing through the void as their engines burned against the silence of space. Every soldier braced for the entry, expecting nothing more than turbulence and fire streaking across the atmosphere, as they had seen on countless other worlds. Yet the moment they touched the edge of Earth's sky, something happened that no one could explain. The air shimmered like glass, bending lights and warping the stars beyond, as though the world itself was wrapped in a veil of illusions. The flagship instruments flickered without reason. Sensors that had measured gravity and heat for centuries returned impossible numbers, temperatures rising and falling in seconds, pressure spiking and vanishing, entire readings collapsing into nothingness. The crews scrambled to reset their systems, but the data never stabilized. It was as if their machines could not see the truth of what lay below. Engines strained against invisible resistance, as if the air itself thickened into walls. The ships slowed against their will, groaning as power surged and failed. Entire fleets staggered in formation. Soldiers clung to their stations as alarms shrieked across the decks. The admirals barked orders to hold the line, declaring that it was only natural turbulence, but the faces of the crews told another story. They saw not turbulence but something alive pressing back against them. Lightning split the skies in patterns too precise to be storms. Vast bolts arched upward and struck the descending ships, wrapping around their hulls like chains of fire. One vessel after another lost power, their engines fading into silence as they drifted helplessly toward the clouds. Soldiers screamed into comm channels as their weapons shut down, as their armor flickered with dead circuits, as though the very planet had reached out and taken hold of them. The admirals demanded explanations. They shouted for reports, but their voices were drowned beneath static. The comms broke apart, filled with whispers, echoes of voices they did not know, voices repeating the same dreadful warning: do not go to Earth, it is a trap, turn back before it is too late. But there was no turning back. The fleet was already caught in the pull of the world inside. The corridors of the ship's darkness spread as lights flickered and died. The soldiers marched through shadows, their weapons heavy and silent, their fear louder than their footsteps. Some swore they heard sounds beyond the metal walls, heartbeats too vast to be their own. Others said the walls themselves seemed to breathe as the ships had been swallowed whole from the command deck of the flagship. The admirals stared in disbelief as their weapons arrays collapsed one by one. Entire fleets, once armed with enough power to break planets, were left defenseless, like prey drifting toward a predator they could not see. Earth hung below them, shrouded in clouds, glowing faintly, as though the storms themselves were alive. The Empire had believed no world could resist them, yet now their strength was stripped away by something they could not name, and as they fell deeper into the waiting sky of Earth, the realization spread among them that the trap was closing and there was no escape. The storm swallowed the fleet as they sank deeper into the sky, engines failing and weapons powerless. The admirals still clung to their pride, insisting the Empire would prevail, yet the evidence of collapse surrounded them. The ships that had once been perfect instruments of war now shuddered like dying beasts, their lights flickering, their hulls breaking apart under invisible pressure. Crews shouted through dead comm lines, voices cutting in and out as static consumed their words. On the lower decks, soldiers who had once marched with unshakable confidence now stumbled through corridors filled with darkness, their armor sputtering as power drained away. Some reached for weapons that no longer responded, their rifles glowing for a moment before dimming into silence. Others tried to open doors only to find them sealed shut, as if the ships themselves no longer obeyed their masters. Panic spread like fire through the ranks as men and women realized they were trapped inside cages that once carried them proudly into Baplatside. The storm raged without mercy, lightning curved like claws around the ships, wrapping them in webs of white fire, each strike precise, deliberate, as though guided by something intelligent. Massive vessels cracked apart under the assault, their debris scattering into the endless clouds. Soldiers and officers alike watched in horror as entire divisions vanished in moments, reduced to nothing more than falling fragments swallowed by the storms. The admirals gave frantic orders to retreat, but retreat was no longer possible. The engines were dead, the navigation systems blind, the controls unresponsive. The fleet hung in the grasp of a force that none could explain. The storm pulled them deeper, as though dragging prey into the depths of an ocean. Invisible currents tugged at their hulls, tilting and spinning the once disciplined formation into chaos. Ships collided with one another, breaking apart in violent bursts of fire inside the flagship. The Emperor voice thundered across the command deck, demanding calm, demanding faith in the strength of the Empire. But even his words could not silence the dread in the eyes of those around him. The greatest empire the galaxy had ever known was powerless against a single world, a world that seemed to breathe and think and choose its victims. Whispers returned across the failing comm's voices, echoing through the static, some familiar, some strange, all repeating the same dreadful message: do not go to Earth, it is a trap, turn back before it is too late. The crews heard the voices of their lost ancestors, the voices of civilizations that had fallen before them. The realization spread like poison that they were not the first to come here, and they would not be the last one. By one, ships disappeared into the clouds, their lights extinguished, their weapons silenced, their crews swallowed in terror. The storm did not relent, it grew stronger with every moment, as though feeding on their fear, as though the planet itself drew strength from their despair. The Empire had believed it was unbreakable, yet now its greatest fleet was dissolving into ruin. powerless before the will of a world that had waited in silence for this moment, a world that was far more than what it seemed, and as the last of the admirals realized the trap had closed, there was no path left but surrender to the storm. From the clouds below, a terrible truth began to emerge. The planet itself was alive, its surface shifting and moving, as though it had consciousness. Every storm and every bolt of lightning seemed deliberate, every current of air and water, part of a vast plan waiting centuries to strike the invaders. The ships that had once seemed invincible now appeared fragile, like toys. Caught in invisible hands, the crews looked down and saw continents twisting, clouds moving, as if in thought, forests pulsing, with light in rivers flowing against gravity, as if obeying some unknown command. The surviving vessels trembled in orbit as strange energy waves passed through their hulls. Systems that had once worked flawlessly now broke down completely, overloading weapons, detonating without command. The sky itself seemed to reach into the ships, grasping and tearing at them, dragging soldiers from corridors, and tossing them like weightless puppets through the air inside the ships. The screams of men and women merged with alarms and static to form a cacophony of terror that filled every corner. Admirals and commanders fought to maintain control, but the power of the Empire was meaningless against a force that moved as a single mind. Each bolt of lightning, each shifting cloud, each pulse of energy directed toward them. Like a predator herding prey into a trap, they could not escape. The blue and green planet gleamed below them, beautiful, terrifying, and impossibly alive, sending shock waves of energy that bent space and light around it. From the forests came shadows larger than any creature they had known, moving with grace and intelligence across the surface. Unseen forces tore at the ships, pulling them into cloud walls that solidified like crystal flames. Soldiers peered out of viewports and saw shapes flickering beneath the storms. Vast tentacles of energy reaching upward, a forest of lightning stretching beyond the horizon of the planet. And through it all, a whisper deeper than any voice penetrated their minds: do not go to Earth, it is a trap. The Emperor watched in disbelief as the realization dawned across the command deck. The Empire had been drawn into a world that was far more than it seemed, a living intelligence older than the stars themselves, and as the first of the capital ships broke apart, the truth could no longer be denied. They had been played like children. The planet had waited patient for centuries, biding its time until the invaders arrived, and now it was consuming their pride, their technology, and their lives. Across the remaining fleet, chaos reigned. Vessels collided as if pushed by invisible hands. Debris spun in endless spirals down into the storm. The surviving crews fought desperately, trying to regain control, but every attempt failed. The planet responded faster than any tactic, faster than any weapon, faster than any mind. The very air and water seemed to work against them, shaping a trap that no one could escape. In that moment, the Empire understood the futility of its conquest. Their hubris and ambition had led them into the jaws of something eternal, something alive, something that would not forgive their intrusion. The skies above Earth roared with storms, the clouds pulsed with light, and the planet waited calm and infinite, patient and alive, ready to consume every last invader who had ignored its warning. The Empire was undone, its pride and ambition swallowed by the living world that had waited patiently for centuries. The fleets that had once filled the void with fire and steel were gone, consumed by storms, energy, pulses, and forces beyond comprehension. The few ships that remained drifted powerless through the skies like broken toys, their crews silent with horror as the full truth sank in. They had ignored the warnings, the desperate voices, the messages repeated across the void, and now there was nothing left but the cold understanding that they had been trapped. From the command decks, the surviving admirals looked out across the devastation, their faces pale, their eyes wide with disbelief. Engines dead, weapons silent. The Empire that had ruled countless systems was nothing in the face of a single planet that could think, move, and act with precision unimaginable. The Emperor himself knelt as his throne had no meaning, his voice unheard against the roar of the storm. As the realization spread that their destiny had been a lie, their confidence shattered, their power meaningless. On the lower decks, soldiers wandered through darkened corridors, haunted by shadows and whispers. Some tried to call out for orders, others stumbled into empty rooms and hallways that seemed to twist like the clouds below. The very structure of the ships seemed altered, as if Earth itself had reached inside to dismantle them. Every corner held the echo of the warning, do not go to Earth, it is a trap. And every heartbeat reminded them that they had ignored it until it was too late. Outside, the clouds swirled with intelligence, Massive arcs of lightning struck down one ship after another, pulling them into the atmosphere, their metals tearing their crews ripped from their vessels and flung into the invisible currents of air and storm energy. Pulsed across the surface, glowing through forests, mountains, and oceans, shaping the land, as if it were alive, listening to every movement, every thought, of the intruders, waiting for the moment to act with ruthless precision. The few survivors clung to the hulls of disabled vessels, watching the empire crumble around them, as the planet consumed its prey, silently, patient, and eternal. The oceans reflected, the light of storms that danced like living fire forests, trembled as the winds shifted violently, and the clouds pulsed as if breathing. Every atom of the atmosphere charged with the force of the world itself, a world that had waited through eons for invaders foolish enough to ignore its warning end. So the empire ended not with a single strike or a war, but by walking into the jaws of a trap crafted by time and intelligence. A lesson carved into the stars that power and ambition alone could not overcome. Patience and awareness. Earth had claimed its dominion over those who thought themselves unstoppable, and as silence fell over the shattered fleet, and the few scattered survivors drifted lost among the clouds, the message echoed across space for all who might come after: do not go to Earth. It is a trap. Turn back before it is too late. The stars returned to stillness, the storms above Earth faded into calm as if satisfied. The world waited in quiet vigilance, ready for the next intruder. The empire was gone, its name reduced to whispers among the debris, and the few who remembered the lesson carried with them the knowledge that some worlds were more than planets. They were living traps, and no force in the galaxy could escape their patience.